Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are today. Happy Tuesday. This is our what we usually do on Fridays. We usually do these Friday live streams, but we're doing a special episode today, mainly due to scheduling availability. So we're doing a special time here today that we normally don't do. So I'm excited to have our first conversation here today of the week. But before I get to introducing our guest here in just a second, just to give you a couple logistical things as people are entering the live streams here, we do these live streams at least once a week, typically on Fridays, and we stream to LinkedIn, to YouTube, and to Facebook. So, and we're also here on Crowdcast, where we're broadcasting from. So, if you're watching on any of those four platforms live, thank you for joining us here today. And what we will do here in just a second, we'll introduce our guest and get into some questions. But before we do that, though, I'd love to hear from the audience where you're joining from today. So if you wouldn't mind just popping in the comments field where it is you're joining from, what part of the world you're in. I love hearing where our global audience is joining us from, and it just gives us a little bit of context of where everyone's at or from here today. So today's topic that we want to cover is actually a series of case studies. We wanted to have a guest on our show that could give us a number of case studies, kind of a flyover of some different projects that we have in process right now here at Third Stage, and some of the projects that he's managing. And a lot of times we have guests on the show or on these live streams where we'll kind of look back at the end of a transformation and look back at all the lessons learned. But we thought it might be interesting to have a guest that's right in the thick of it right now, working with clients side by side with them and in our project teams to work on some of these transformations and really just look at what's happening right now. Like, we're in the thick of these projects. What are some of the challenges we're facing? What are some of the challenges that the client is facing? And what are some of the lessons that we're learning along the way? So that's one of the approaches or the things we wanted to cover here today in this discussion. And so with me today on today's show, I invited Braden Gerbig from the Third Stage team. So Braden, thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, you've been on the show before, but it's been a few months since the last time you were on. So I thought it'd be good to have you on and cover some of the more recent projects that you've been on. But before we dive into some of the case studies and lessons learned of projects you're working on right now, maybe just talk a little bit about your background. What maybe prior to Third Stage, what did you do, and what do you do now at Third Stage?
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. So Braden Gerbig, I'm a director with Third Stage. I've been in a number of roles over the years, both with large consultancies, but also smaller boutique firms, mainly around technology, looking at how technology furthers the business challenges in terms of not only digital transformation, but large system implementations, also some custom software development and implementations. And so over the years, I've worked with not only smaller local companies, but large global integrated companies. And the challenges are not only, pretty standard across implementations, but also depending on industry and location, et cetera, there's a number of considerations that come into play when we talk about technology.
Right. Good. In your role here at Third Stage as director, you're overseeing at any given time sort of multiple clients, and you see them, from start to finish all the way through their transformation journeys. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Sort of what is your role, and your role's a little bit unique in that you're at a senior level, so you're kind of touching multiple projects along the way rather than being just on one project at any given time. So maybe just talk about what your involvement is on some of these projects.
Yeah, sure. That's correct. So we start by some conversations around the challenges that the client is facing. It's really a kind of a discovery effort at first. And so because I am over multiple clients and overseeing a number of projects in flight, a lot of the challenges that we're seeing on projects that are already up and running or just getting started, those challenges translate to a lot of the conversations we have initially in terms of what the client is trying to achieve. So we start there, understand the goals and objectives, and really dive into some of the challenges they're facing currently, get an understanding of the current state, talk about legacy systems, not only systems, but also the company and the organization, and where the organization is trying to go. So getting that starting point well defined, we'll go through a number of conversations to flesh out their team, the company size, revenues, things of that nature, and understand whether or not they're coming into another growth cycle, whether that's through an acquisition or organically, and start to understand how the systems will fit that landscape, and really start that exploration in terms of defining the team and duration of a project, and really getting more folks engaged in the conversation to start scheduling our kickoffs and alignment sessions and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting for sure hearing you talk about some of the clients you're working with, just because you do get such a broad exposure to some of these different companies. And there were three in particular that we wanted to talk about here today, and sort of dive into, what is it we're doing with each of these clients? What are some of the challenges we're facing? Why are they trying to go through their transformations? And I thought it'd be just a good way to learn about from other organizations, some of their lessons. And without giving away the names of the companies, obviously we can't give away confidential information or the company names themselves, but we can talk about a little bit about what the organizations do, what we're doing for them, what some of the challenges are, and what some of the lessons are. And the three that we were going to cover today, one is a chemical manufacturer based in Latin America. So we have the fortune, or the good fortune, of being able to work with a global client base, clients and teams throughout the world. And this particular one is in Latin America, and they're a larger chemical manufacturer in Latin America. We're going to cover that. We'll cover a financial services organization, a large financial services organization based in the U.S. And then we'll also talk about an industrial component infrastructure manufacturer based in the U.S. as well. So those are the three organizations we're going to dive into a little bit and get some lessons from. But before we do that, just a real quick update on where people are joining from today, particularly over on LinkedIn. Just looking at the stream here, we have a good turnout there on LinkedIn, and we've got a couple people from London, San Diego, Toronto, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Yorkshire, England, India. We have someone from Spain here on Crowdcast, among others. So total global audience here today. So this is a very fitting topic, I think, for a global audience, given that we're going to cover some global organizations here today. But let's start off with, of these three case studies, let's start off with the, why don't we start with not the industrial component one, the chemical manufacturer in Latin America. Let's start there. And maybe just tell us a little bit about the company without mentioning it by name, obviously, or revealing confidential info. Just tell us a little bit about the size, scope, complexity of that organization, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Without giving away too much, it's a large chemical manufacturer, and they deal with a lot of distribution challenges in a number of different Latin American countries. So you're talking more than a handful of different countries. So localization is a big concern. And when you take a large ERP spread across numerous countries and locations, the challenges become several in terms of not only the usage at the user level, but then also standardization at the corporate and leadership levels. So trying to establish at the leadership as that across a number of different countries. I keep wanting to say companies, but countries, right, is really the challenge. So going to each of those locations and identifying the challenges, bringing that back, and standardizing how we'll approach that from a systems perspective is extremely important. So you mentioned that they're Latin American companies. So, we also have language and cultural differences that we navigate through during the course of the system concerns. And so with that, we have translation during sessions, and it's a bit of a unique challenge when you're working, especially remote, over a laptop or over a computer, conducting sessions with translation. You have a lot of real-time chats that are going from Spanish to English or English to Spanish, and then also discussion and decisions being made in those meetings. So it's a lot to keep track of. Excited to take on the challenges, and it's really quite an experience from a learning perspective, just in terms of how we manage across language and culture remotely. So we're applying those lessons learned to our exploration process, and it's going well so far.
Good. So what is it that, maybe just to look at the big picture of what led this company to their digital transformation? Why are they going through this? Why did they hire us? And maybe what was the problem statement they were trying to solve?
Sure. So, they're a legacy user of, well, I should say a legacy user of SAP. So, I think this is not unique to SAP. It's a challenge that we have with a number of companies that have legacy ERP that are not only in place for a number of years, but various modules, various customizations, taking that legacy ERP to current abilities and version, looking at is that ERP still the best fit? Do we want to consider other elements, or continue with that ERP or another vendor, and start assessing the needs really at the user level, to understand if we want to go through a full selection or just an upgrade. So those are the kinds of things that we're approaching. And as I mentioned, with the number of countries involved, we have SI considerations as well. The localization is really a big concern when it comes down to the SI.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine that. The cultural and language aspects that you were talking about a moment ago, and then obviously the complexity of the organization in general is obviously a big consideration as we're thinking through this. So they're on a legacy SAP system. They're trying to figure out, do we upgrade? Do we just upgrade to the S/4HANA within SAP, or do we look at something totally different? How are we helping them? I mean, what is the process we've gone through so far in the journey? It's sort of midstream right now.
Yeah, it's selection methodology.
It looks like we lost you, Braden. All right, we'll try to get him back on here in a second. There's a bad connection here, so we'll get Braden back on here in a moment. But maybe I'll answer the question for him while he's reconnecting. But in general, we were hired by this organization to do a software evaluation and to help them through the evaluation process. So that, I think, was what Braden was starting to talk about, was the evaluation process that we're going through. And now you're back, Braden, so I'll let you finish. I was trying to answer it for you, but I wasn't doing a very good job, so I'll let you answer that question again.
No, I'm sure you were just fine. Yeah, we go through our documentation, but conducting a number of interviews both at the leadership level and then also what I call the frontline managers of those processes, really getting some in-depth detail around how the organization works, and then applying that to the system landscape, whether that's tier 1 vendors or tier 2 vendors. We cast a pretty broad net at first, and then narrow that down to a short list pretty quickly. to understand who will be involved in the RFP process. And then we reach out to those vendors to conduct the RFP process. And from there, it really comes down to demonstrations following RFPs. We're not quite there yet, but the demonstrations really help us understand not only how the system accomplishes the requirements as we understand them in the current state, but we also want to observe that and really understand how it works in their system. And that's a very scripted process, and that's designed to standardize the response so that we can compare standard across vendors, because the systems are not all going to look and feel the same, and we want to really drive out the functionality and understand how the system will work in their environment.
Right. So what are some of the lessons you've seen so far on this evaluation? I know it's early, we're still working towards that decision and path forward, but what are some of the lessons you're finding, or some of the takeaways or aha moments that we've had so far on this project?
Yeah, I'd say for this this client in particular, the challenge is not so much will the system work for us. The challenge is really more around, I guess, disqualifying a vendor than it is identifying the most appropriate. So by that I mean, all the systems we're evaluating will work for the challenges we're exploring at the moment. So it really comes down to really getting into the lower level detail to identify the correct vendor. So by that I mean, if all vendors that we're assessing at the moment have the functionality or the capability to work with the client in terms of their needs, it really comes down to how they partner with the client, the total cost of ownership, long-term concerns, really digging into the detail of the business case. So that's probably the first lesson. The second lesson is when you look at tier one vendors, whether it's the usual names that come to mind, SAP, Oracle, or other. You're really assessing not only the partnership levels, but also the peer group in the industry, and do they work well in that industry? There are some cases where certain industries are a challenge for some vendors.
Right. So I know it's early to ask this, and it's always risky as a consultant to jump to conclusions, but given what you know so far and what we know so far about this client, what do you think they'll do? I mean, if you had to bet money on, are they going to stay on SAP, or are they going to go with something different? Where'd you bet your money? I hate betting, by the way, but I like to ask where they bet their money.
It's a pretty dangerous question to ask in the middle of a selection, but I'll go ahead and answer it anyways. There's some things that are beneficial to understanding the legacy environment. The vendor, the challenges associated with the vendor. You understand where you might need some additional support in terms of other applications, bolt-ons or integrations, things of that nature. You also understand the industry challenges with the vendor. So I guess to quit dodging the question, my gut feeling is that they'll continue with SAP. Now, whether or not that's how that continuation occurs, that still remains.
Yeah, and I know that's an unfair question to put you on the spot like that, but it is an interesting dynamic, though, because we see that a lot, right? Where clients, I mean, some clients we work with on their evaluations, they have old legacy, homegrown systems that clearly need to go, and they're clearly going to rip it out and do something different. But then you get clients like this where they're using a semi-modern ERP system. They've invested a lot of time and money in it. They've built competencies around it. And so the threshold, it seems like the threshold that you have to meet to be able to justify ripping that out and going a totally different direction, it's a much higher threshold, even if the system's imperfect. Even if there's theoretically a system out there that might be slightly better than what they have, it's got to be a lot more than that to be able to justify the risk and the cost of just kind of throwing that all out and starting over with a new system or landscape.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And a lot of times our clients, and this is true of, I think, most of our clients, are going through some kind of life cycle event, and that triggers the need for adjustment. Whether that's throwing out a perfectly good system, and I don't want to say throwing out, because we do carry forward a lot of the process, a lot of the understanding that the system provides. But if we're replacing that with a new system, the business case has to be pretty sound. And I think that's what I mean by when I say disqualifying other vendors. You have to have a really good reason for why one vendor works and why another vendor doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit. And before I do that, though, just a reminder to the audience that's watching this live over on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, feel free to chime in with any questions on any of these case studies or just general questions you might have for Braden and I. Love to get your input. I've got a series of questions I'll keep rolling with, but if you guys have questions at any point, feel free to jump in, and I'll keep an eye on the streams here as we're talking. So let's shift gears and talk about the... let's go with the financial services company in the U.S., the larger financial services company. Tell us a little bit about that company, what they do, and sort of what's the situation. Why did they hire us?
Yeah, again, similar challenges, only in this case, less of a remote concern. We're looking now more at just more of an upgrade to the latest and greatest. But there are a number of considerations that go into this. It's really not only bringing the technology forward, but some of the overall business strategies. You talk about things like reporting strategies, and start getting into the complexities of reporting on large U.S. concerns. That's a difficult and unique challenge when you're talking again about tier one players, because you need to understand the underlying data structures, really how the data structures play into the long-term goals of the organization, and getting those established in the process as you're getting prepared to stand up an ERP implementation. So it's really our role in this is different in the sense that we're not going through a selection per se on this effort. We're more providing some guidance around large implementation, and really using our quality assurance framework to assess the project as it moves into implementation. We're still very much in the planning stages. So we're looking at the underlying planning, how the SI is partnering with the client, and really how long-term not only industry expertise plays into the strategy, but also how the teams are structured, making sure that we have alignment from the leadership level down, and really helping to make sure that the system plans and designs are in place appropriately before implementation.
Yeah. So look, quite a bit different than the last case study we just talked about, in that the path has already been defined, the technology has been selected. There's sort of a general strategy that they're marching towards, but they hired us to help make sure that the implementation goes well, and that they kind of fill in some of their blind spots on their team. And this is another one, and I intentionally picked these three case studies because they are fairly early, and you get some of those initial first impressions from the projects, and you sort of, you and the teams that are working with you are getting a lay of the land in many cases on these projects, including this one. Well, what are some of the initial, just at a high level, some of the initial buckets of risk or challenges that this client are facing, or that you see on the horizon for this particular implementation so far?
Yeah, I think, not to get into too much detail around the risk, but I think it's a common risk that we find in large implementations, and that's really identifying the appropriate expertise. It's really a challenge even at the global level to identify people that have the depth of experience that you need going to a newer technology. You mentioned HANA before, and that there's the talent pool for experience in those implementations is limited, right? So identifying people that have been through these challenges, whether they be reporting challenges, data strategies, logistics, warehouse challenges. There's all kinds of challenges that are associated with a new system, and not having the maturity of that system in the marketplace to be able to point to other case studies. You're kind of leading from the front, and that's a difficult challenge.
Yeah. I would think, especially for a relatively conservative industry like financial services, and I don't mean conservative politically, obviously. I mean more risk adverse and more focused on controls and that sort of thing. It seems like the risk is a bit higher in that regard.
Absolutely, and that's where you want some extra eyes and ears, folks. Other projects that you can point to that are case study of going through these challenges and been there, done that kind of look, and that's where we rely on our team and our other offices. We have seen these large implementations globally. The number of implementations here in the U.S. is probably limited, so finding those case studies in the U.S. is not always easy. So that's where we lean on our global offices to identify where these implementations have occurred previously.
Yeah. And I know on this project and in other projects that you're involved with and we're involved with, we have a lot of cross-pollination between offices and team members. We have an office in London and then an office in Brisbane, Australia, with teams based there. So it's kind of nice to be able to draw from the global skill set there to support that. What are based on where we are in this project right now, what are some of the next steps, or what are some of the things that are on the short-term horizon as far as helping them get ready for this journey they're about to go on?
Yeah, it's really coming back with some pointed looks at where we go next in terms of architecture concerns. And as I mentioned, that's both at the data level, but also at the reporting level. So do we partner with other vendors in the mix in terms of SAP and other, or do we go more with a purist strategy and lean heavily on SAP as the vendor and bring them in to leverage their expertise in these areas of challenge? And I think when you're talking about a large SAP implementation, it makes a lot of sense to leverage their expertise in the areas that we need. And getting other vendors at the table can sometimes overcomplicate things, and it's a delicate balance. So we want to meet the need. We want to identify the best approach, but we also don't want to overcomplicate things. The old adage of keeping it simple definitely applies here.
Yeah, and especially when you've got a complex transformation like that, a complex organization, a very large organization, it can be easy to get lost in the details and overcomplicate things. So I think that's a good sound advice. It's interesting, just as a side note, it's interesting that, and I didn't realize this until we actually got into this discussion here today, but as we were planning for this, it didn't occur to me that we have two of the three examples here are somehow SAP related. One's an existing SAP customer that's trying to figure out, do we stay on SAP or do we upgrade to S4HANA? And then, in this case, it's one that's already decided they're going to implement S4HANA and they're heading down that path. Do you think in general, we as a company are starting to see, even though we're independent, we're technology agnostic, we're not aligned with any software vendor, we're not affiliated with SAP. We do a lot more than just SAP implementations. We do, Oracle, NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics, et cetera. But it seems like we're seeing more SAP projects recently, or either troubled projects or ones that are underway. Do you think that's a bigger trend in the industry, or is that just a coincidence that we're talking about a couple of, two SAP projects in particular here today.
Yeah, I think it's both. We're talking about SAP a lot right now, I think, because there are a number of companies that are looking at S/4HANA. And as I mentioned, newer product, newer challenges. And it's not only, SAP specific, but we're also talking about cloud versus on-prem right now. So that's a big part of the conversation. A lot of the newer versions bring in cloud concerns, and you're talking about not just a shift in strategy, but also a shift in the personnel that the client needs to consider in terms of things like data strategies, integration, support, training, education. These are all things that with newer technologies become difficult, as I mentioned, because the number of resources available to handle those challenges, again, are limited. So there are ways to bring in that expertise over time, but trying to hit it in a large implementation where you're bringing in significant resources to address concerns early in the project. That's a considerable challenge. You've got to reach out to more partners, more vendors, more consultancies to understand if they have the resources available to handle the implementation. So I think SAP's we're probably hearing about it more because we're doing it more. So we find that people are interested in our experience because we're addressing these challenges frequently right now.
Yeah, and it seems like as we as a company have grown, our client base has gotten larger, in terms of their size, and so that leads you towards more SAP implementations as well. So it seems like there's a number of factors at play there. One that is less likely, although we don't want to jump to conclusions here either, but the third case study we have today is probably a lot less likely to be heading down the SAP path as part of their journey. But before I jump to that conclusion, maybe we could talk about the industrial components and infrastructure product company that's based here in the United States. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, tricky. Anytime we work with large industrial manufacturers, we start working with things like regulatory agencies or larger bodies that govern these types of manufacturing. So the challenges become more on the supply chain side. We start talking about more logistical challenges. We start talking about location challenges. A lot of these manufacturers are in rural locations or sometimes remote location, and so you start looking at infrastructure challenges, all kinds of things that may not apply, especially when if you compare it to like a financial services company, for example. We're not talking about more of a corporate implementation. We're talking more of a frontline operational implementation that really becomes the concern. And so, we spend a lot of time in the actual manufacturing process, understanding the challenges associated with a manufacturing line, whether they be planning MRP or if it's more of a shipping and logistics concern. These are all things that are much more detailed at the process level. So the interview process becomes more detailed. Understanding the requirements becomes much more detailed. But in a lot of cases, especially when you talk about manufacturing, you're taking a client from a green screen, a system that's been in place for 30 or 40 years, and bringing that into today's technology, and that's a quantum leap. So with that comes a lot of training, a lot of education, just in terms of today's capabilities. And really, it's the thing you find yourself educating people on is they don't know what they don't know in terms of if you've used the same process and system for 30 to 40 years, you're not going to quickly understand what's available to you in today's technology at an ERP level. It's a massively different process. We're not talking about printing out reports and reading printouts and marking up printouts anymore. We're doing that in workflows within the system, and a lot of that is automated. So the process changes significantly. And so, designing that process and change management, all the training that goes along with that is really more of the challenge in this case.
Yeah, that's an interesting point and an interesting contrast to especially the first case study where, we're talking about, that potential incremental upgrade from an old legacy vendor to the newer vendor product. Here we're talking about less likely to be a incremental upgrade, more of a big shift. And I think that seems to be an area or a measurement of magnitude that a lot of times companies don't understand or think about is, how big of a change is this really going to be for us? Is it more incremental? Is it a massive, use the word quantum leap? And those are two different paths with two different strategies and different types of pressures and risks and that sort of thing. So that's really interesting contrast especially compared to that first case study we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, it's really, I think it comes down to spending more time in that collaborative environment to really get the client involved in understanding what it's going to take to go through that transformation, right? So it's kind of going along for the journey. The journey really becomes more of the process than the actual technology, because you're getting a new understanding of how you're going about your daily work, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the change strategy is going to be totally different. There's more risk. There's usually more cost associated with that. There's more time. So, you compare that implementation roadmap compared to one that is less of a change, you're probably going to end up with two different paths and two different answers, which is why, that cookie cutter, one size fits all approach is so risky with organizations that are going through projects like these.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really exciting too when you start looking at companies that have been doing the same daily process for 30 years. When you start talking about making these massive adjustments, it's exciting to see how that transformation takes place. You're talking not only about efficiencies, but just a new way of doing things, and it makes things in a lot of cases simpler at the user level once new systems are adopted in cases like this. But it also starts to shed light on a better way of doing business, just in terms of understanding things at a detailed level that maybe weren't available before.
Right. So you sort of touched on this already, but when you talk about the magnitude of change and how big of a change this is going to be, in addition to that magnitude of change in this particular case, what are some of the biggest challenges that this client is facing, or that we're facing as a team in helping this particular client from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We're hearing a lot about the supply chain crunch right now, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, because when you look at things like the MRP process, for example, there's only so much you can do in terms of efficiencies and making the supply chain challenges. Finding solution to the supply chain challenges. There's I think just an understanding now that we need these systems more than ever, because we need better information to handle the challenges. We need to go further than just our tier 1 suppliers. We got to look at tier 2, tier 3. We need that information to be able to adjust ordering, products, goods things of that nature is not. We can't just do business as usual. So we're having to have further looks into our value chain and really get better detailed understanding of lead times and things of that nature. So, it's really kind of designing that system at a more detailed level in terms of you're trying to solve for a real world challenge now, in addition to solving for your business. And so taking those into consideration really kind of augments the discussion to say, okay, we're in a real world challenge right now. How can the systems help for that challenge as we continue to not only serve our current client or customer base, but as we grow and expand in this environment. This client in particular is opening new locations. And so standing up new locations in this challenge is something that we need to consider. And again, the same challenges that I mentioned in the first study apply. New locations bring new cultures and new environments into play that we need to standardize and align and get the messaging out there that the system will help drive not only the workflows but also the communications and how we work across locations and cross-functionally and get out of silos and integrate our business more tightly.
Yeah, you hit on a couple really interesting points there. They're big, massive issues, that obviously supply in one, and that's top of mind for a lot of organizations. And then you talk about the cultural shifts that this all entails. On the supply chain side, I guess this is more of a general question, maybe not so much just for this particular client, but you can answer it just for this client if you'd like. But I guess I'm curious: are you seeing that organizations in general, including this one, do they have a good handle on what it is they need to do to fix their supply chain issues? Whether it's technology improvements or process or people issues or all the above, or what's your read on that, just from what you're seeing right now with clients?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing consistently is just when clients go to address this challenge, finding people is probably the biggest component of the equation. It's a really difficult environment right now in terms of being able to keep staff in place to handle the workload as one piece of the supply chain slows down, another piece of the supply chain will speed up, and so identifying the people element and understanding how we can maybe offload some of the processes into a systematic environment, I think could help address some of these concerns. But really, you're talking about frontline people within those processes where we have the biggest challenge. And then the other piece of that equation is the suppliers, and so it's really looking beyond, as I said, looking beyond tier one suppliers and getting into tier two and tier three. And so it's establishing ways of doing that, whether you're used to ordering by phone and now you have a more automated way of doing that, or a better supplier portal, things of that nature. Those all help with managing some of these challenges that we're seeing now.
Yeah. And it seems pretty widespread. I mean, I don't talk to all of our clients every day, but the ones I do talk to, when I do talk to them, it seems like supply chain or something related to supply chain, whether it's getting raw materials they need, or whether it's labor issues, whether it's shipping and trucking issues. There's so many breakdowns happening in the supply chain right now. So it really is becoming a pretty urgent sort of thing. Do you find that, in the case of this case study or others clients you're working with, are there any interim fixes that these companies are going through? I know I'm going down a rabbit hole, by the way, of supply chain management, but this is very interesting and top of mind for a lot of people right now. But are they doing anything in the interim to fix their supply chains while they're waiting to select new software, implement new technologies and things of that nature? Or do you see a lot of companies that are sort of paralyzed until they can get to that point of getting through their transformation, or at least the first phases of their transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're seeing both. I think some of the things are logical, quick fix solutions. Things like having more inventory on hand, but obviously you can only do that so much. And when you're talking about you know, everyone facing it in those locations, right? So, and then the other thing is better visibility into the logistics. So once product leaves the door, where is it? When's it going to be there? These are very basic challenges that really come down to communication and availability of information, right? If we know where something is, we can push on it to get there faster. If we don't know where it is, then it's going to get there when it gets there. And these are the kinds of things that they sound simple, but when you're talking about everyone facing the same challenge, even at down to the consumer level, it's really we've got to get better systems in place to handle the communications and move product faster.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and at least anticipate where the problems might be and give you some time to react to it or adjust to pivot from that.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess to close the loop on these three case studies, then they all happen to be, although they're all very different industries, different geographies, different issues and technologies they're dealing with. What are some of the common themes in these three case studies as far as lessons or takeaways for organizations that are about to start their transformation? Because all three of these case studies are pretty early in the journey. Are there sort of themes or a couple different themes that you're picking up on in these case studies and others where we're early in the cycle like this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, you mentioned it because they are early in the stages of development. I think alignment is key, right? So getting alignment at the leadership level, and then really getting it at the teaming level to make sure that we're all marching towards the same goals and objectives as it relates to the implementation. Adopting some of those newer ways of doing things leads to training. So getting the right teaming in place for training and understanding of the system, establishing those kinds of communications to really head off the change challenges that we face. These are pretty common themes with all our clients. I think going through any kind of transformation in terms of the system, whether it be tier one or a tier two, tier three system, we really want to get that adoption at all levels, and that takes time, it takes effort, it takes meetings, and everyone has a day job, and so trying to take away time to participate in these meetings, to talk about the system, to talk about some of the cross-functional issues, getting out of silos, and really looking at how data flows throughout the organization. These are all common themes.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good stuff. It's a good place to wrap it up, and a good summary for anyone about to start a transformation. And that's exactly why we wanted to have you on here, was to kind of learn as in real time as these lessons are popping up in these case studies. What are some of the things we can take away and apply to other situations? So really appreciate you having you on the show here today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and thanks to the audience for listening. And be sure to check out this interview. We'll edit it and polish it up and make it part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast, which will come out a week from tomorrow. So you can check out the full episode with this interview along with others in our episode of Transformation Ground Control, which you can also find on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube, or you can subscribe to any of the audio podcast platforms like Google and Spotify and Apple Podcast, all that good stuff. So thanks again for being here, everyone. Appreciate you joining here on a Tuesday, and look forward to seeing you in the next session. In the meantime, hope you're all having a great day, and we'll see you all soon. Take care. Thanks again, Braden.
Thank you.